Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into something, well, pretty complex, to be honest. The dissolution of Yugoslavia.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll be looking at the roles of NATO, international law, and how events in Kosovo and Crimea are often compared.
Right.
And get ready, because you might be surprised by what we uncover.
Yeah, these events, they're often oversimplified. But when you really look at it, dig deeper, it's a story full of nuance and consequences that we still see today, you know?
This is something that I have a personal connection to, actually. I had the chance to visit Yugoslavia myself several times before it fell apart. And to see such a rich mix of cultures just unravel, it was heartbreaking, really. It's often been described as like watching a group marriage just crumble under pressure.
Yeah, I like that analogy. It really captures the complexity, because Yugoslavia wasn't just diverse geographically. It had this tapestry of different religions, nationalities, all woven together and with a lot of historical baggage, a lot of trauma.
And on top of that, we have to talk about the role of Western powers. They didn't just stand by and watch. They exploited the existing tensions, playing on those traumas between the Croats, the Serbs, and the Bosnian Muslims.
Yeah, some people would say that it was a very deliberate strategy, a classic divide and conquer approach.
Definitely.
And if you look at it in a wider context, it raises a lot of questions about their motivations. Were they trying to break Yugoslavia into smaller pieces? Republics they could more easily control, republics that could eventually be pulled into the European Union and NATO. It's a question worth asking, I think.
Absolutely. And what's even more tragic is that some people believe that this didn't have to happen, that Yugoslavia's disintegration wasn't inevitable.
Right.
That with different policies, different approaches, they could have saved it.
Yeah, different outcomes were definitely possible.
But it seems that, I don't know, maybe due to a lack of understanding, or maybe just arrogance, Western powers failed to truly grasp how complex and interconnected the situation really was.
And it makes you think about why that was, why they didn't really seem to make an effort to understand it. One possible factor is how the West has historically viewed the Serbs, their Orthodox Christian faith, and their close relationship with Russia has often led to them being seen with suspicion, almost like the bad guys in the story.
Yeah, and that suspicion, combined with a simplified view of the whole situation, well, it led to some questionable decisions, I'd say. There was this real focus on removing Slobodan Milosevic from power, as if that would just magically solve everything. You know, it's interesting to compare that to later interventions, like in Iraq and Libya. Similar logic, but different context.
It does make you wonder, can you ever really bring peace to a place by simply removing a leader? That seems to have been a recurring theme in Western foreign policy. But has it ever really worked? I mean, it ignores the underlying issues, the social, political, and economic problems that are often the root causes of these conflicts.
Yeah. And speaking of leaders, I actually met Vojislav Koštunica back in 1999. You know, the president who came after Milosevic. And he was incredibly frustrated with NATO. They just finished bombing Yugoslavia. And then they demanded that Serbia join NATO if it wanted to be part of the European Union. It seemed almost, I don't know, contradictory.
That demand really speaks to the power dynamics at play, doesn't it? It's like, do what we say or face the consequences.
Yeah. You know, I truly believe that Yugoslavia could have been divided peacefully.
Yeah.
But instead, it was ripped apart by violence and conflict. I was actually in Belgrade during the NATO bombing, and it was a harrowing experience, to be honest. I remember my Serbian friends trying to find some humor amidst the chaos. They joked the CIA now stood for can't identify anything after the accidental bombing of the Chinese embassy.
Oh, wow. That incident, while tragic, really does highlight the inherent risks of military intervention. Even with the most advanced technology, mistakes happen, and the consequences can be devastating. It also raises the question of accountability. Was there any apology? Any attempt to make amends for the destruction?
Well, unfortunately, no. You rarely see Western powers truly acknowledging their mistakes or taking responsibility. After the bombing, there was this massive exodus. 800,000 refugees fled to Macedonia. And this directly contradicted the narrative that these people were fleeing Milosevic's ethnic cleansing. It was the NATO bombing that created this crisis.
Right.
But there was no admission of guilt, no offer of any kind of restitution.
It makes you think about the consequences of unchecked power. Do we see these same patterns repeating themselves today with other emerging powers, like China, for example?
That's a very important question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we need to think about carefully. The events in Yugoslavia should serve as a warning against simplistic solutions to complex problems.
Ah, absolutely. The world is rarely black and white, and understanding the nuances, especially when lives are at stake, is crucial. The dissolution of Yugoslavia was a tragedy, fueled by a lack of understanding, by arrogance, and by a thirst for power. It's a chapter in history that we should never forget.
And as we delve deeper into the cases of Kosovo and Crimea, we'll see how the legacy of Yugoslavia continues to shape the geopolitical landscape.
These comparisons, as you'll soon discover, are far from straightforward. The truth, as always, is in the details.
It really is. But first, we need to take a quick break. Stay with us.
You know, it's interesting how the case of Kosovo has been used to justify other interventions, and sometimes with pretty disastrous results. It's almost like a dangerous precedent, a blueprint for redrawing borders by force.
Yeah, under this idea of humanitarian intervention,
exactly.
It seems like. The lessons learned from Yugoslavia, well, maybe they were the wrong lessons. Instead of really grappling with that complexity and trying to find peaceful solutions, it's like some actors just doubled down on the same tactics that caused the initial conflict.
Right, and that brings us to NATO. They claim to be a defensive organization, but their actions in Yugoslavia, especially the bombing of Serbia, well, they raise some serious questions about that claim. Was it really about defense? Or was it about a powerful military alliance, using force to achieve its goals, regardless of international law, or the will of the people involved?
It's a really important question.
Yeah.
And the aftermath of that intervention, particularly in Kosovo, well, it's still playing out today. The Declaration of Independence in 2008, it remains highly contested. Some argue that it lacked a solid legal basis, that it was done without a referendum, and that it directly contradicted the Serbian constitution, which considered Kosovo an integral part of Serbia.
Yeah, the lack of a referendum is a key point. A region declared independence without even consulting its own people. And that was only possible because of NATO's intervention. Their bombing campaign forced Serbian forces out, which led to the establishment of international administration and eventually to that Declaration of Independence.
So in a sense, NATO's actions directly led to that outcome.
Right, exactly.
And it raises questions about this idea of might makes right. Did NATO, acting without a UN mandate, reshape the borders of Europe through force?
It's a valid question.
Some legal scholars would argue that it could even be classified as aggression under international law.
It's interesting, though, because that aggression was largely accepted by the international community, especially Western powers, who saw Kosovo's independence as, well, aligning with their interests. But it set a precedent that Russia would later use in Crimea.
And that brings us to Crimea, another flashpoint, another disputed territory, and another example of how the narrative is often more complex than it first appears. Unlike Kosovo, there was a referendum in Crimea in 2014, where over 90% reportedly voted to join Russia.
Right.
But Ukraine and many Western nations considered it illegal and illegitimate.
And here's where things get even more interesting. The presence of Russian troops in Crimea after the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution. Well, it raises questions about the validity of that referendum. Were people voting freely? Or were they under duress? Was it a genuine expression of self-determination? Or was it a land grab orchestrated by Moscow? It's still a matter of intense debate.
So we have these two situations, Kosovo and Crimea, both involving attempts to change territorial status, but with some key differences.
Right.
No referendum in Kosovo, a contested one in Crimea, NATO intervention in one, Russian intervention in the other. And vastly different international responses. It's a very complex situation, to say the least.
It really highlights the inconsistencies and the power dynamics within the international system, the selective application of international law, and the power of narratives in shaping our perceptions of these events. Was NATO's intervention in Kosovo justified? Was the Crimean referendum legitimate? These are not easy questions to answer. They require careful consideration, weighing the evidence, and acknowledging the complexities involved.
It's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric. The blame game.
Yeah.
The competing narratives. But as we've seen, the reality is probably somewhere in the middle.
Absolutely. We need to move beyond simplistic explanations and delve into the nuances, the historical context, and the motivations of all the actors involved. Only then can we truly begin to understand the implications of these events and hopefully prevent similar situations from arising in the future.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the key figures who have been vocal about these events. Ursula von der Leyen, for example, has been a strong critic of Russia's actions in Crimea. But some people point out that, well, she holds an unelected position, and they question the EU's handling of certain internal matters.
It's worth considering those points. Von der Leyen's role as president of the European Commission is indeed unelected. She has a lot of power. But she lacks the democratic legitimacy that comes from being directly chosen by the people. It raises questions about accountability and transparency within the EU itself.
Yeah, and it's not just von der Leyen. Look at Denmark. They used to be known for their neutrality, their peaceful approach to international relations, but now they've participated in military interventions in Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and Libya. It's quite a dramatic shift.
It is a significant change, and Denmark's involvement in those conflicts, especially the Iraq War, which many argue lacked a legal basis under international law, well, it sparked a lot of debate about Denmark's commitment to peaceful conflict resolution and its role as a responsible member of the international community.
And then there's Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former Danish prime minister. He played a key role in Denmark's decision to join the Iraq War. And his actions have been heavily scrutinized. And yet he was later appointed Secretary General of NATO.
That appointment really speaks to the complexities of international politics. It highlights the disconnect that can sometimes exist between actions and consequences and the various factors that influence these decisions, like political alliances and strategic interests.
It's disheartening to see how some social democratic parties across Europe, parties that were once champions of peace and social justice, have seemingly embraced a more militaristic approach. It feels like a real departure from the values that drew me to peace studies.
Your personal journey is a powerful reminder that individuals can make a difference, even in the face of these huge challenges. The path you've chosen, inspired by pacifist thinkers and peace researchers, well, it's a testament to the power of hope and the belief in a better world.
It all started with my high school headmaster, who's an extraordinary individual who really instilled in me the principles of nonviolence and Gandhian thinking. And he was also instrumental in rescuing Danish Jews during World War II, a true hero who showed me that courage and compassion can triumph over hatred and fear.
It's amazing how those early influences can shape our worldview and ignite a passion that stays with us. It shows the lasting impact of those who champion justice and understanding of...
Yeah, and that fight for peace continues. We may not see a world without war in our lifetime, but we can't give up on striving for it. Peace isn't some naive dream. It's a necessity. A rational choice. It's the only path that offers hope for humanity's survival.
I agree with you. The alternative, clinging to militarism and perpetuating conflict, well, that's a dead end. It leads to destruction, suffering, and ultimately our own demise.
Let's choose peace. Let's choose dialogue, understanding, and cooperation. Let's learn from the mistakes of the past, challenge the narratives that divide us, and build a future where peace is not just a dream, but a reality.
A future where international law is upheld, borders are respected, and power is used responsibly, not recklessly. A future where reason and compassion prevail over aggression and violence.
That's a future worth fighting for. And that's why we do what we do here at The Deep Dive. We dig deep, we challenge assumptions, and we try to empower you with knowledge.
Because knowledge is power. And the more we understand the complexities of the world, the better equipped we are to face those challenges and create a more just and peaceful future.
It's all about understanding and learning from the past so we can build a better future.
Exactly.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive today. But the conversation doesn't have to end here. Subscribe to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We're here to make things clear.